Welcome to Fitter Every Day, the show where we break fitness into bite-sized bits to help make you fitter every day. Today we're going to be talking with Amy Boyd, who's the general manager of North Ankeny CrossFit, and she is one of the people that has the most influence on what happens at all of the locations because she works in the lesson plan, she works in the programming, and she's been doing training, whether it's personal training or leading gyms, for more than a decade now. So she has a ton of experience in dealing with people. And now one of the things that we're going to get into today is a little bit sensitive for some people because it's recognizing that everybody comes from a different place. And there are some people that are dealing and bringing to the party things like trauma or assaults or harassments that they've had to deal with. And we recognize as a business that we could do this better. So anything that we need to talk about with dealing with people, Amy Boyd is the best person to bring on for that. So there are going to be a couple bits of conversation in there that involve links to different services or different forms. They're going to be linked in the show notes in both YouTube and on the podcast descriptions. So if you are interested in either one of the things that we talk about, which are a link and a form, those will be linked below. So without any further ado, we're going to be talking about width and depth of your business and making sure that you don't sacrifice one for the other with Amy Boyd on Fitter Every Day. So the thing we want to talk about today is width versus depth in programming. And in a CrossFit sense, the width means the variety of things that you're doing, and depth means how good you are at any one of those things. Mm-hmm. So the things this concept, we'll start with it with exercise, but we're going to move on beyond that because I think the width versus depth conversation is really applicable to a lot of different situations. So from a training perspective and a programming perspective, how do you balance that width or breadth versus depth? So like the variety versus quality conversation, how do you balance that when you're programming?
It's a great question. And, generic programming versus individual for people that are competitive, it's a little different. But if you talk about the average CrossFitter, the person that's just coming in to be fit, right? So as a programmer, my job is to make sure that they can walk out of the room and, like we talked about our definition of fitness, they can do whatever they want to do whenever they want to do it for as long as they want to do it. Mm-hmm. So it's my job then to make sure the variety is present so that they can do all those various things, right? So I have to make sure that I'm not just programming clean heavy or just programming snatch heavy or whatever it happens to be, that there's equal amounts of different types of movements. So they can go out and do that stuff. Now, that being said, we spread ourselves too thin with our programming or we make it too much variety. Now I've got kind of a chaotic field of things. I feel like maybe my members never feel like they actually get good at one thing because there's all the things thrown at them all the time. So there has to be equal balance of opportunities to grow better in things and opportunities to do a lot of things. So I think when we look at it, I know you and I, like in Sean, when we look at programming, we're looking at a 6-week cycle. We're not looking at a day or a week. We're looking at 6 weeks. So I think that helps you balance things a little bit better when you take a broader look back and say, okay, I've got the variety here, but I also have opportunities built within percentage-based lifting or with progressions this day and then a little different progression this day so that they can actually grow better at muscle-ups. They can actually get better at snatches or grow stronger. So there has to be a good balance.
Yeah, there has to be a balance. And I think when you're talking about as an athlete, it kind of flips a little bit where like, where do you want to put your attention? Because if you just come into a class and just do whatever you're going to do in a day, then I don't know, I don't really have any control over that. I'm not going to, as an athlete, if I'm just showing up, I don't have anything to say about the programming. I mean, I can say it, but the people doing the programming
say enough, yeah,
may or may not listen. But when I'm going to focus, then should I be frustrated that I am not getting stronger at my back squat, for example, while I am simultaneously gaining new skills in gymnastics or something like that? I'm not gaining the depth in one area that I want to have by gaining this breadth, this width in these other areas. And so I think sometimes we can talk about this in a sense of frustration / plateauing, air quotes.
Sure.
Is that a lot of times people will get mad that that this particular lift or this particular skill isn't being acquired at the rate that they want to, but width is getting developed here. So perhaps someone is working in a strength cycle not a strength cycle. Someone's working in just a general kind of a GPP, general physical preparedness, like a CrossFit program, and they want their back squat to be going up, but it's not, but they are simultaneously gaining skills. How do you approach someone how do you talk with a client or with a member when they are having frustration that their back squat isn't getting better, when the depth they want isn't there, but they are gaining width? How do you kind of deal with those frustrations that a client has, and or speak to somebody who right now is dealing with those frustrations?
Yeah, I think there's a couple different ways you can go with that. First of all, my question is going to be, what's the goal for your back squat? Why do you have this goal for your back squat? What's going on here? What are you wanting to get out of that? But the other conversation I think you need to have is how often you're attending classes, what's your diet look like, what's your sleep look like. There's things that if your programming is solid, your members should be making progressions through things. And sometimes you have to backtrack with them and say, part of the reason you're not making a progression in an area that you want to be making a progression in your strength or whatever it is, because of not what you're doing here, it's because of what you're not doing here, if that makes sense. So there's a couple ways to go with that conversation, but I do think there is a place for people that maybe have a powerlifting background, or maybe just have some serious goals with their back squat to say, hey, I understand what you're saying, and we kind of do a GPP thing here. Like, my goal is just to make sure that you can go out there, you can sit on a toilet and you can get up, or you can do
when you're 80. Hopefully you can do that now, but like when you're 95, you can still get up and down from a toilet. Yeah.
Right. But if you have a back squat goal, I'm not going to poo-poo that. That's fine. That's great. Like, let's get you into personal training. Or, here's Catalyst has a great program for this or whatever. So we can offer some supplementation during our open gym time. With caution that says you need to look at the programming ahead. That becomes your responsibility because Amy gets it in there plenty ahead, and ensure that you're not doubling up. Ensure that you're also not doing too much. Whereas where I kind of feel like personal training maybe would be a better fit, because then you have someone with the guidance of the programming helping you supplement towards your goals.
Yeah. So with that personal training, that is an interesting thing, because you do more of that than the rest of our staff tends to do. The rest of the team tends to do.
Yeah.
So as a personal trainer, more on the when you are putting the personal trainer hat on, how do you increase so with a client, how do you increase the specificity of that without overloading them in any direction? So let's say they want to have that back squat increase, and you mentioned, it's kind of your responsibility to make sure that you don't overlap with that. But let's say there is a personal training client. One, what is the benefit of that, of doing a personal training thing with whether it's you or somebody else, in addition to a regular class? And two, as a programmer or as a personal trainer, how do you balance those two things of making sure that they do still have a good class? So what's the benefit for a client side, and then how do you carry that responsibility as a personal training add to those things?
It's a scary thing to think people don't get asked that question or don't pay attention to this, because I think that happens. But first of all, I control the programming, or you and Sean, but I'm the one that inputs it for our general classes. I also control the programming for personal training. So I'm very fluid and knowledgeable about what it is that they're doing in class, and then what I can be doing with them that doesn't over pull, over press, over squat, over lunge, etc. I also have conversations with them all the time. I see you did class on Wednesday. How did that go? Are you sore? Then we can kind of change volume either within our personal training session, or I tell them to back off in class. Hey, I know it says 95 pounds tomorrow. I'm going to need you to take that down in weight, because here's what we did. That's going to be too much. So I have to be very specific with controlling what they're doing outside of their sessions, and then what they're also doing inside their sessions, keeping in mind that they're paying me about $1 a minute to personal train. You're not paying that for a CrossFit class. So they're paying to see that progression and see that progress happen with me within that hour a lot more. So it's my responsibility to kind of prioritize that time for them, and then schedule their stuff outside, whether it be CrossFit class, going for a jog or whatever, to make sure that they're still meeting the demands of what they need for their fitness, but not overdoing it.
Yeah. And so one of the things I was hearing you say in there is just mentioning that using the depth and width conversation is that you're able to gain depth on a thing they want to improve, that a client wants to improve, whatever that may be, while not sacrificing width or the other way around. There is a risk, there's a natural inherent risk when you do put too many eggs in one basket of, I want to do too many things, or I want to get really, really good at this one thing, is that you sacrifice the other side of that equation, where if someone wants to increase their back squat, that you're going to have to invest time into building that back squat. It's just going to, you can't shortcut that. There's no shortcut to it. So you have to just do the work there. Well, you also have life to do. You mentioned, someone wants to go for a jog, or they want to go take a vacation. Like there's stuff you have to do. You can't just always be training everything everywhere. And so you got to make a choice on depth versus width. So I kind of want to translate out of this, because when we were preparing for the episode, there's one thing that you had brought up, which I think kind of taps into this interesting balance between the two, that you don't want to make sure that you don't stretch yourself too thin, but you also still want to access the depth of the thing. There is a type of client that seems to be overlooked a lot of different places, and that was a thing that it feels like you encountered professionally when you started kind of taking on different clients or experiencing new things, that with conversation. And then once you found this thing that's completely untapped, that you went deeper into that one particular thing, which that client that seems overlooked is a person who is dealing with trauma. Because from my experience, and I'll have you talk about this in a second, is from my experience, people that struggle with trauma, whether that be veterans or whether that be people that went through abuse, or whether that's people, whatever, class environments with loud music and a lot of people in there and not being able to see everything and not knowing everyone and feeling like you're kind of the stranger in the room, that's really hard for people that are suffering from trauma or have experienced trauma to any degree, whether it's minor or major, severe to just an acute little mini, a smaller trauma. So that person a lot of times gets overlooked, and they kind of have to just deal with it themselves and or not do it. So dealing with and training people with trauma, one, how did you get into that? And two, what are the difficulties that you have kind of encountered as you've kind of grown into that lane of dealing with that person, but also with what that person specifically experienced? So how did you get into that in the first place?
Yeah, that's a great question. And thanks for letting me talk about this, because I think it's really overlooked, like you said, and it's an important conversation. You look at anybody in the service industry, whether it's a hairdresser, it's a dentist, anybody that services people in any way. And you talk about trauma-informed care. And trauma-informed care just means that the professionals in that space have taken the classes and had the training to know how to handle, and not just handle, but how to welcome people with trauma into their business and help them feel safe and secure. It's just not really heard of, right? And imagine, had you been strangled in your life and you go to a hairdresser and a hairdresser comes at you from behind and puts a cape around your neck, okay? That instantly is going to elicit a trauma response. So as I started personal training and I was getting more and more clients, and it was a quantity thing, and I was like, this is great supplemental income, I started to notice that, especially with this one client, people feel real vulnerable, right? When you're personal training.
Yeah, because there are very few things that are personal training, very personal. Like
very.
You're at your ugliest and grossest when you are exercising, and the only other person in the room is the trainer that's got you there.
And what I started to notice is the more I personal trained, the more that vulnerability started to provide opportunities for people to really just dump life, right? You and I kind of joke sometimes that people dump life on us, like, hi, my name's Jeff. Awesome, let me tell you about my alcoholic parents. I mean, it's just like random strangers at Casey's, and you're like, wow, that was a lot of information. I don't even know your name.
I'm glad that you feel that you trust me with that information, but wow, I was just getting a coffee. So.
Yeah. So in addition to being a person that people feel comfortable just saying stuff to, now I'm a personal trainer in a situation where I've been training you for 6 months, and now you're sharing some really vulnerable things with me. One, for example, I will never use names, but we got a heart rate up super high in a sled push. That had her feeling like she couldn't breathe, and that elicited instantly a PTSD response. In that moment, I was not sufficiently educated to know how to help her. We had it happen with a veteran in the gym that had been through some PTSD issues, was trying to work out, and then had a flashback. I touched that person. Come to find out through education, that's probably the worst thing that I could have done in that moment, because he's not present in the moment. So there was a gap in my education and growing deep in personal training that I really felt needed to be addressed. And the more that it's funny how when you start to see things, you really see things. The more that I started to educate myself, the more that I started to seek trauma-informed care education for myself, the more you realize this is common. Like, trauma in people's past is extremely common, and we all have different ways of dealing with it and different responses. But when you get in a situation where, like you said, you're exercising, you're at your ugliest, you're really being vulnerable, that's a lot of times when those responses come out. So my job then is to help those people overcome that and feel strong, feel confident, whether it be the environment from the beginning when they walk in, whether it's mid-workout or when they walk out the door.
Yeah, and I think the thing that's interesting about that is that the trauma-informed just means that you're aware of what to do when that situation arises.
Right.
But in order to be aware of what to do in that situation arises, you have to be aware of that person. And so I think the skill of being trauma-informed, or the skill of paying enough attention about this person to get enough information from this person, means that you get better at the skill at just paying attention to what that person is going through. Whether or not that person has substantial life trauma, like I don't have a substantial life trauma. I got little ones across past that I've had to deal with, but it's nothing like a physical PTSD response that a veteran or a client like that you had mentioned before. But at the same time, by being more cognizant of that trauma-informed response, you also just build yourself into the habit of knowing this is a person with a unique backstory, with a unique situation, who responds to things in very, very different ways, and things affect them differently.
Right.
How did you say that like the trauma-informed stuff has sort of kind of built out your capacity to see them as a person, see, no matter where they're coming from, with no judgment, no preconceived notion of what they should expect or what they are expect? How has that kind of increased your capacity across everything else of seeing that person as they are?
Yeah, I think when you take an opportunity, I mean, I noticed your books when you walk in, but when you take an opportunity to educate yourself, whether it's about a lot of things or a certain thing, you automatically grow deeper in that thing, right? And then you start to see that thing and you start to find opportunities and almost seek opportunities because you can become passionate about that thing. And that's kind of where I'm at now. I am almost at the point where I'm ready to start seeking opportunities. So I just had a really cool one. My client got a grant from the government to do a trauma-informed care webinar. And,
cool.
And the government paid me this last weekend to do a video for the webinar where I was able to talk to trainers about trauma-informed care. And then I was able to talk to survivors and give them both an at-home workout and then a gym workout that actually, now that I've educated myself, you just unilateral movements, cross-body movements, and different ways of dialing in focus that actually changes the way that your brain works when you work out. So now I'm getting into like neurological stuff, and I'm starting to learn that like if I structure that 60 minutes based on anxiety, it's going to look different if I structure it based on depression. It's going to look different if I structure it based on someone who's highly like stressed out and just discombobulated when they walk in the door. So now I'm actually able to take emotions and physical responses to those emotions and tailor workouts so that their brain is like, okay, I'm good. I have a singular focus. So it's just been a really cool experience to keep digging into that. And I plan to keep doing that.
Yeah. So this wasn't necessarily one of the parts. So where can someone find that, by the way? If it's access to that or that actual webinar itself or just this information, this isn't the entire point of the podcast, but where can someone find that?
Okay. So I'm going to get her information for the actual webinar. So I'll get that to you. I don't know that off of the top of my head, but I will get that to you. But here's the fun thing. Most people are like, okay, trauma-informed care. I've never heard of this. Literally Google it. It's a thing. And there's actual companies out there that you can click on that will provide the education that you need for trauma-informed care. But you can also see hairdressers that are trauma-informed, and you can start to find those professionals within your area. So it just takes a Google search, but most people have never even heard of it. So don't know to search for it.
There's another thing that when we were preparing for this, we were thinking about how in order for that client to have brought that information to you, they would have had to trust you with that information. Yeah. And they would have had to build that trust in a one-on-one situation and felt comfortable enough to share that to you. We don't get that opportunity with everybody.
Right.
You know, like to be able to have that one-on-one opportunity where I get you for an hour. We're sitting here, we're talking, I get to know you like to a deeper level of what your past is like, what your comforts are like or whatever. And we realize that if someone does have one of those things, and this is more specifically to any one of the Goldfinch locations, not necessarily with general like in the world,
sure,
is that we might not have the infrastructure built to be able to handle that. So like when we were preparing for this episode and just talking about the trauma-informed care stuff, we recognized that like that was a gap within ourselves, because let's say someone does have some type of trauma in their past or some type of event or something that occurs, they have to somehow they have to be brave enough to volunteer that information to someone, which if you're dealing with something that's not easy, like
right,
you're not going to come to a stranger and say, hey, I was walking down the street and got punched in the back of the head once, and now I get nervous in corners. Like it's not doing that. It's not going to be a thing that's doing. So like one of the things that we recognized in preparing for this episode is that we don't have a way to report or bring up any information that is something sensitive to somebody. We didn't have that infrastructure built. So we actually went through and started specifically with something like a harassment itself, because if something happens in the gym, we need to be able to know that, because that person has to be able to volunteer that information. Harassment of any sort, people have to be able to volunteer that information, and they have to also be comfortable enough that it's going to go to the right spot. So I know that you in gym spaces in the past, and or being a woman, you have dealt with something like harassment more than I have. What is kind of, when we were talking about this before, what are the things that come to mind as far as like the things that we as a gym need to do and are trying to do now that we recognize this hole is there?
Yeah, I'm just so glad that we're having this conversation. It's just so important to have. And it is a gap where we need to grow deeper as a business. Whether it's exposing and letting us know about some trauma or some harassment, as a female, the common thread that I see when this happened to me, or when I hear this happen, is I feel like I'm tattletelling. I feel like I probably led this or did something wrong. I'm really sorry. I'm embarrassed. And as a gym owner, so remove the female and personal part of this, just as somebody who runs the gym, hearing that, I'm like, I want to protect their ability to come to my business. Mm-hmm. I want them to feel comfortable and safe being in my space. Personally, when I hear that, I go, this isn't your fault. You need to feel okay with letting us know that you're not okay. So we need to provide an environment, but not just an environment. We need to perform some kind of a form for people to let us know, like, this isn't okay. I don't feel okay. And I want somebody to help me handle this in a way that they're not apologetic, that they don't feel embarrassed to come into the gym, and that they don't feel like necessarily they did something wrong. Because the worst thing I think that can happen is it goes unsaid. They leave your gym. You don't know why. Even though we have an exit interview, maybe they don't feel comfortable saying that. They leave your gym. Maybe the other person leaves the gym. Now you're down 2 members. But more importantly than that, those people have left an environment and a community that probably used to be real safe for them, and now it's not. So yeah, I think that's kind of a long-winded answer to that, I guess. But that form that you and I have created, and that the space to be able to report that, I think is a gap that we're covering to grow deeper. And I think a lot of businesses need to do the same.
Yeah. So the thing that you were mentioning, so we put together a form, and by the time this airs, or by the time this goes out, it's going to be linked on any one of the Goldfinch Athletics websites that we have. So any one of the location websites, or goldfinchathletics.com and it's just going to be a form where you could submit if something happens, that whether it's a harassment incident, or whether that's a trauma that you feel like something that we need to know that you don't feel comfortable submitting, that email goes directly to a specific email account that only you and I have access to, and then you and I will have that conversation. And if you want it specific, on that form, if there's something that you only want a female to deal with, it'll go directly to Amy. If there's something that you feel comfortable just going to management, then it'll go to that shared account. So the ability of the thing that we wanted to make sure, again, when we're preparing for this episode, we were talking about trauma-informed care. What if something happens that they need to talk about, that it happened in our space?
Yeah.
We didn't have a mechanism by which to catch that. We didn't have a mechanism by which to do that. And like, the 3 things that we want to be in anything is professional, welcoming, and effective. And if we're not welcoming, if the environment that someone comes into and they say, this is the place, this is the happy place, this is the place that I want to come in, I can check away from the world, I can put my phone down, and I can just exercise and let it out, and then something happens there, or something happens with someone around there to make that no longer welcoming, nothing that we did, but it's something that we could potentially help with. So when we were prepping for this, we recognized that was a hole that we had in our game that we needed to fix, because we genuinely care about the people in our under our care, our clients, our members, that we want to make sure that they have the ability to report something if something happens, or let us know about something that is pretty personal, they don't want to like go out of their way to do. And one of the mechanism that we needed to have when we were creating this form was that it can be done if you're sitting in your car outside of a parking lot somewhere, and it takes 5 minutes to hit submit, and it is seen by absolutely no one but you and us, like the person that it went to, and then the people that are going to deal with it, and the people that have the capacity to, again, receive it without judgment, receive it as, this is something that happened, let's talk to you about what happened as much as you feel comfortable talking about it. So that it really was one of the things when we were prepping for any podcast episode, we recognized like that is a thing that we don't have, and we absolutely need to. So that was, we just wanted to make sure that we got that information out.
And I will say, just kudos to you and Sean. I think a lot of business owners are scared of this, not only conversation, but scared of taking this step because it looks reactive. And they're afraid of the membership base being like, what happened? Well, who did what? What happened in your gym? What's wrong with your gym? That's not what's happening here. What's happening is we recognize we can do better in servicing our members, and we feel like we know that this exists. I think I'm probably more acutely aware of it now than I've ever been in my life, and that it's an area where we can be caring for people better, and we can just be doing better. So I would just say kudos to you guys for not only recognizing that, not shying away from it, and being willing to do something about it. My hope would be other business owners hear this, not just gyms, and take that next step too, so that just people feel safe and secure in environments where they deserve to feel that way.
Well, yeah, thank you. And I think the thing, it comes from a genuine, and this is not just Sean and I, like this is you, this is Tucker, this is whatever, genuine care for the members that exist. Like, you don't get into fitness or the service industry generally because like you are just going to make gobs of money. Like, that's not how it works. Is you get in there and honestly, the job prospects aren't that great. Like, you got to work for 5 years making nothing before you actually can make any money. And the reason you start it is because you really enjoy helping people. And the people that you're helping are the members, your clients, whatever, someone that's there. And if you genuinely feel like if you genuinely want to help your clients, then you have to look under every rock and say, is there something we can do better? Is there something we can help someone more? Is there something that we can make our space more comfortable or more confident, or someone more confident when they walk into our space, that these people truly have our back, that no matter what happens, no matter what instances coming in or occurring in life, I know that I am good at this place because I am welcomed and cared for in this place.
And just to put a quick bow on that, like, we're talking about growing wide, right, versus really getting deep and getting into the roots of your business. You're not making extra money by creating this. Mm-hmm. You make extra money by creating more programs, finding more people, Like, this is just caring for people, and this is doing the right thing. So when we talk about growing wide versus really getting down into the roots of your business, like, it takes a heart for what you do. It takes a passion for what you do. And it takes an ability to say, yeah, I could add 15 more things to my plate and probably increase the income of my business, but I'm not doing the work for the people that are there.
Yeah. So that's what drives everything that we do, is just making sure that we care for the members as best as we possibly can, and legitimately keeps us up at night sometimes, but
yep.
Hopefully it's worth it for the people that walk in, people that, whether it's dealing with us and experiencing this online or experiencing it in person, is that like, we really genuinely care for the people that are there. And it sounds like lip service a lot of times, and it sounds like whatever, but that's the point of this episode, is recognizing that we could do a better job in certain spots, and you being the person that's done with trauma-informed care led us into the fact that we had a hole. And so we had to replace that and fix that thing with what we needed to do better. So yeah, I think it feels like we've covered it. So this is an ongoing conversation though, because if someone does have something like this and they don't necessarily feel comfortable submitting that form, there are other ways to get a hold of us, because they might not trust that the form is going to go to the right person, or they might whatever. Again, that the only place that's going to go is to you and I. And then if for whatever reason we're able to get someone like an HR director 10 years down the road, it would be dealt with in the most respectful way that we possibly can. But if there is something that someone is encountering, that they want to communicate to us or you or whomever, they can just email or call you or me directly. And so either one of those things can still exist. So really the whole point of creating this form is to give someone an opportunity to do that. But if they don't feel comfortable doing that and they want to reach out more personally, by all means, please do that.
Absolutely. Yep. We're always here.
Cool. All right. That is it for this episode, width and depth of a business, but also just trying to talk about what we need to do better and what we are trying to do better in the business. And I think that's all we got.
Yep. Right. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, everybody.